On a particularly dark and stormy night, the wind howled furiously outside the old creaky Moonlight Inn, where I worked the night shift as the receptionist. My name is Alex, and as I manned the front desk, the rain hammered the windows, making the hotel's aged facade groan with every gust. The once vibrant red carpets were now faded and worn. The wallpaper peeled away in many places. The hotel was nearly empty, with only a few guests tucked away in the rooms. As I tried to focus on my paperwork, a creeping sense of unease settled over me. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the relentless storm and the tick of the clock on the wall. Then, abruptly, the silence was shattered by the creaking of the front door. I looked up to see a man standing in the doorway. He was drenched from head to toe, his dark coat and wide-brimmed hat dripping with rain. His face was obscured by shadows, but his piercing eyes glared directly at me. "Good evening," I said, striving for a calm tone. "How can I assist you?" The man stepped inside, leaving a trail of water behind him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a wallet, placing it on the counter. "I need a room," he rasped, his voice sending a chill down my spine. I said, "Of course," forcing a smile, saying, "Do you have a reservation?" "No," he snapped, his tone curt and impatient, saying, "I need a room now." There was something unsettling about him. His clothes, though expensive, seemed outdated, as if he had stepped out of another era. His face, too, seemed vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. "I'll need to see some ID," I said, sticking to the hotel's policy. The man hesitated, then reluctantly handed me his driver's license. The name on it was Jack Harrison. As I returned to him, I noticed his hands were trembling ever so slightly. "Room 13 is available," I said, handing him the key. "It is the only room left on the ground floor." "Enjoy your stay, sir." Jack took the key without a word and moved down the dimly lit hallway. I watched him go, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. As the hours dragged by, the storm outside only intensified, and the wind screamed around the old building. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Deciding to ease my mounting anxiety, I did a quick search online and stumbled upon a chilling discovery, a news article about a Jack Harrison who was wanted for a series of violent crimes and had disappeared without a trace years ago. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911 immediately as my voice was trembling, and as I relayed the situation, the operator assured me that the police would arrive soon. The minutes felt like hours as I waited, straining to hear any sound from room 13. Finally, the wail of sirens broke through the storm's roar. 2 police officers arrived, their faces set in grim determination. "Where is he?" one officer asked. I pointed down the hallway to room 13. The officers nodded and proceeded down the corridors immediately, moving with purpose. I followed closely, my heart pounding with each step. They knocked on the door. "Mr. Harrison, this is the police. We need to speak with you." There was no response. They knocked again, louder this time. Still no answer. One of the officers turned to me. "Do you have a master key?" I handed it over with shaking hands. The officer unlocked the door and pushed it open, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. The room was empty. The bed was untouched, and there were no signs that anyone had stayed there. The window was open, rain pouring in and soaking the carpet. The officers exchanged worried glances. "Are you sure this is the right room?" one asked. "Yes," I stammered. "He was here. I gave him the key myself." The officer searched the room thoroughly, but found no trace of Jack Harrison. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. "Call us if you see him again," one officer said, handing me a card. "Keep the doors locked." I nodded, still in shock. They left, leaving me alone with the eerie silence of the hotel. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and confusion. I reviewed the security footage, but saw no sign of him leaving the building. As dawn broke and the rain finally began to ease, the other staff members arrived for their shifts. I recounted the night's events, and they were as baffled as I was. To this day, the mystery of Jack Harrison's disappearance remains unsolved. Some say he's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. All I know is that I'll never forget that stormy night at the Moonlight Inn and the enigmatic man who vanished without a trace. On a chilly autumn evening, my friends and I, driven by a mix of curiosity and audacity, decided to venture into the old abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. The factory had long been a subject of local legend, rumored to be haunted by strange creatures and eerie sightings. We were determined to uncover the truth behind these tales. The factory loomed before us like a forgotten giant, its broken windows and rusted metal doors telling stories of years of neglect. As we approached, the wind howled through the desolate corridors, sending shivers down our spines. We squeezed through a gap in the fence and entered the darkness, our flashlights casting long flickering shadows on the walls. "Let's check out the elevator shaft," Tristan suggested with a fearless grin. Tristan was known for his bravery, or perhaps recklessness, and we followed him, eager yet apprehensive. The deeper we went, the more the factory seemed to come alive with a palpable sense of foreboding. At the elevator shaft, Tristan peered into the abyss below. "I think I see something," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I leaned in, squinting into the darkness. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw some shadowy figure, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "It is probably just a trick of the light," I said, trying to reassure myself and the others. Bobby, the skeptic of our group, scoffed. "You're all imagining things. There is no such thing as ghosts or monsters." We continued exploring, moving through rooms cluttered with old machinery, broken furniture, and debris. The air was thick with dust, and every footstep echoed ominously. The factory's silence was occasionally broken by strange creaks and groans that made us jump. As we reached the upper floors, Bobby suddenly halted. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. We strained to listen, and there it was, a faint rustling, as if something was scurrying across the floor. "It's probably just rats," Sarah said. Though her voice betrayed her nervousness, we pressed in. But the unease among us grew stronger with every step. In one large room, we stumbled upon a makeshift camp, old blankets, empty cans, and a small fire pit. "Looks like someone been living here," I said, trying to rationalize what we were seeing. "Maybe it's just a homeless person," Tristan suggested. It seemed like a plausible explanation for the noises and the mysterious cellaway. Feeling uneasy but determined, we decided it was time to leave. As we retraced our steps towards the entrance, Bobby suddenly pointed ahead. "Look," he whispered, his face ashen. A shadowy figure darted across the hallway ahead of us, moving so swiftly it was almost a blur. "Guys, did you see that?" Bobby's voice was barely more than a breath. "There's someone here." We quickened our pace, our hearts racing. Suddenly, Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream. We turned to see a dark, menacing figure standing at the end of the hall. Its eyes glowed eerily in the dim light, and its tall, thin form seemed to stretch impossibly. The figure's bony fingers twisted as it watched us. "Run!" Tristan shouted, and we didn't hesitate. We sprinted down the hallway, the figure closing in behind us. As we reached the stairs, I dared to glance back. The figure stood at the top, its glowing eyes locked on us, the haunting gaze that seemed to pierce through the darkness. We burst out of the factory, gasping for air, and didn't stop until we were safely on the main road, far from the menacing structure. We stood there, breathless and wide-eyed, trying to make sense of what we had just witnessed. "Maybe it was just a person," I said, though I didn't really believe it. The way the figure had moved, the glowing eyes, it felt far from ordinary. Bobby, still visibly shaken, nodded, saying maybe, but it didn't feel right at all. Tristan, usually the confident one, was unusually quiet. "I don't know what that was, but I don't want to go back." Sarah shivered. "Me neither. That place is cursed." As we walked home, we tried to laugh off our fears, but deep down, we all knew something truly unsettling had happened that night. We couldn't explain it. And maybe we never would. Even now, years later, whenever I hear strange noises in the dark or catch a glimpse of a shadow, I remember the glowing eyes and the sensation of being watched. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some places are best left unexplored. My name is Tom and I work as a delivery driver for a quaint diner called Maggie's Place. My shifts were typically uneventful until one chilling October night, just days before Halloween, when I encountered something I'll never forget. It was an unusually cold evening, the sky cloaked in thick, ominous clouds that obscured the moon. I was preparing to finish my shift when the phone rang with an order: a cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake. Routine stuff, but the address was unfamiliar, leading me to a deserted street called Maple Avenue, a part of town I rarely visited. The drive to Maple Avenue felt longer than expected. The streets grew quieter and darker as I approached. Finally, I turned onto Maple Avenue and was immediately struck by the eerie silence. The street was deserted, not a single car was parked, and the houses looked dark and forsaken. I arrived at house number 103, a large, dilapidated mansion with peeling paint and broken windows. The overgrown yard and creaky gate added to the unsettling atmosphere. I walked up to the front door and knocked, the sound reverberating through the empty house. When no one answered, I knocked again, more forcefully this time. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a voice from above. "I'm coming," it said. I looked up to see a shadowy figure in the upper window. Although I couldn't make out the figure's face, I was relieved to know someone was home. I waited on the porch with the food, but no one appeared. I called out, "Hello, your food is here," but only silence responded. I checked my phone to confirm the address and tried calling the number on the order slip, but it went straight to voicemail. As my unease grew, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to see an elderly woman standing on the sidewalk, her expression one of concern. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked. "Yes, I have a delivery for this house," I replied, pointing to 103, but no one is answering the door. The woman's eyes widened in horror. "No one lives there. That house has been abandoned for years. It's haunted." A chill ran down my spine. "Haunted? Are you sure?" She nodded gravely. "People say they hear voices and see shadows in the windows, but it's been empty since the family that owned it died in a fire." I was stunned. The house looked like it had been deserted for a long time. I turned back to the house, feeling a growing sense of dread, asking myself only one question, and that is, who had placed that order? Deciding to leave the food in the porch, I started walking back to my car. Suddenly the voice came again, louder this time. "I'm coming." I spun around, but the porch was empty and the house was silent. My heart racing, I jumped into my car and sped away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. When I returned to the diner Maggie, the owner noticed my pale face and asked what happened. I recounted the entire unsettling experience. She listened intently, then sighed. Maple Avenue, huh? I've heard stories about that place. It's been abandoned for over a decade. Must have been a prank call." "A prank call? It didn't feel like one. It felt too real." I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something supernatural had occurred. I finished my shift, but sleep eluded me that night as I replayed the voice, the shadow in the window, and the old woman's warning over and over. Curiosity eventually got the better of me. I researched the house at 103 Maple Avenue and found old newspaper articles about a fire that had destroyed the house 15 years ago. A family of 4 had perished in the blaze, and the house had remained vacant ever since. I still don't know who or what I encountered that night, but I've never returned to Maple Avenue. Each time I pass the part of town, a shiver runs down my spine, and whenever I hear someone say, "I'm coming," I can't help but remember that haunting night in the abandoned house with the shadowy figure in the window.